So I recorded this episode, and I hope it doesn't sound too too bleak, like if you listen to it. But I wanted to basically just talk about like why we believe certain things we believe, and like why it's good to critique our own belief systems. And I don't think people do that a lot. And I don't know. It just sounds like I'm. I feel like when I listen to it back, it sounds sort of negative, like I'm talking bad against my own beliefs. But I actually think it's good to critique why you believe what you believe. So maybe the next episode I'll defend why I believe what I believe. That being like Christianity and other stuff I talked about. Or why I believe it's true. So this episode is basically just about, I don't know, a lot of different things, critiquing my own beliefs, and why we are never satisfied with certain things. And then I don't know, there's maybe a funny story at the end. So hopefully you enjoy it. If you don't, well, too bad, so sad. So on with the episode.
My family don't see me more, that's growing up. And now they calling me C4, I'm blowing up. So if we sitting on seesaws, we going up. Some people get going, but I love it when the going's tough. Too young to know enough, too old to play the part, too cool for showing up, too dumb to say what's smart. So I'm a substitute, waiting for the game to start. But I ain't trying to get played like change of heart. Chuck Woolery, I host and rip the stage apart. And hopefully you're willing to admit that I have made my mark. And may I park and find me another ride. I'm letting Florence tell you how I feel inside.
Check. All right, we rolling. I think. So, I usually have a guest, but today I'm just going to kind of go off the cuff with it maybe. And I'll just delete it if I don't like it. So, that's that. I feel like the older I get, the less I know about reality, if that makes sense. So I feel like you go through phases in life. Like when you're really young, obviously you don't know jack. And then as you get older, like maybe like a teenager or something, you feel like you kind of got things figured out or whatever. And then I think if you're a smart person or more intelligent than an average person, you kind of realize that your parents don't know everything and that you don't know everything. So you go through that sort of third stage of like, or at least I did, questioning my beliefs and how I came to believe certain things that, I was just sort of naturally taught or grew up with. And, so the first phase, you sort of think you don't know everything. Second phase is, like when you're a teen or whatever, you think you got everything figured out and your parents don't know, jack. And then the last being sort of another phase of realizing that you know hardly anything about what's going on, or at least I do. I don't know, I just got to thinking about that, like, the other day, like how much I thought I knew, growing up as a teenager, and how I think now. Maybe that's just because I've studied philosophy for, 6 years or something. I feel like, and I used to kind of get mad, which I shouldn't. I mean, it doesn't really matter. But like, I used to get mad when I would see people online, talking about like really fundamentalist type people who just are closed-minded to every variance of opinion that that differs from their own. And I used to get mad because I just felt like they, how can you look at the world through just your own? I feel like they were looking at the world through just blinders, right? They were just going through the world and strictly not questioning anything, like not questioning why they believe that, quote, Jesus died for your sins. Why do you believe that? Like, why don't people ever question that? Like, and I'm speaking of someone who grew up in the South, so I mean, it's different. Maybe it's different from someone who's hearing this, who didn't grow up in that environment. But I grew up in an environment that's predominantly Christian for the most part. So I guess the main thing that irritated me was just the fact that maybe I presupposed my own knowledge and investigating onto them. In other words, like, I feel like people should do their homework when they don't ever do that. Or at least fundamentalists usually don't. Like, a person who believes that, and I'm not saying that I don't believe that, that I'm not a follower of Jesus Christ or whatever. I'm just talking about in general how people latch on to things. And I think primarily it's like a defense mechanism, right? Like, people, it's hard to question your own beliefs. It's hard to look within and ask yourself, well, why is it that I believe that? Why is it that I believe that I need to be saved? Why is it that apparently I'm created sick and then ordered by a God to be well, right? I mean, that's sort of the fundamental claim. It's not really put that way by a fundamentalist Christian, but the claim is that you are created a sinful person, or a person who is sick, and you're ordered to be well. You're told that you have to be redeemed, and the only way to do that is to believe that God sent His only Son to, die on the cross for your sins, to be killed. It's the equivalent of me, saying that, okay, this person down the street is a sinful person, and the only way that he can be saved is if I take my son and I offer him as a sacrifice. I mean, if you were to just say that now, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, there are good reasons to believe it's true, and there are good reasons to believe it's not true. But I'm just laying out a case, right? I'm not saying what I believe or what I don't believe. I'm just sort of, I don't know if you'd call it ranting, but I wanted people, when I was angry, to question, like, why do you believe certain things that you believe? And when I would go to church, and then I would hear people who I felt like were less educated, philosophically speaking, than me, I would get mad because they would say something without, and I got to realize, or I did realize, that they're not speaking from a place of like from a philosophical perspective. They're speaking from a perspective of that's just what they believe, and they're talking to other fellow believers. But I think as a Christian or a follower of Christ myself, it's good to question things and ask yourself why it is you believe whatever your belief is. Like, really, really dig down deep, and most people don't do that. And I don't mean to sound like pretentious when I say Like I felt like I had a knowledge, better than someone else or whatever. I just felt like I was there was a period in my life where I was questioning a lot of things, and then I learned a lot. I learned. I read. All the great critiques of religious belief. From Nietzsche to Feuerbach to Jean-Paul Sartre, Camus, even Dostoevsky. Even though he's a Christian, he still had really hard critiques of Christianity and just dogmatic belief in general. So in my mind, when I would go to church or some sort of religious meeting or whatever you want to call it, I would get angry because they would say something that I didn't believe was true. And I knew that they didn't know the argument against it. So I'm trying to think of an example. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but I guess what I'm saying is, like, when someone would say something and I knew that it could be sort of deconstructed philosophically, like, like there are things that we don't have answers for in life and we just have to accept, right? And I feel like certain types of religious beliefs, especially sort of fundamentalist Christianity in the South, they offer up what's called theodicies. They offer up reasons as to why God does things, and I think it's silly. All it is a defense mechanism. We don't want to not know why something happened. We don't want to know that it could be just a complete indifference in the nature of reality, right? I mean, like when you don't want to tell a parent that their child died of cancer, and that's just what happens in reality. No, you want to tell them that God has a plan and that things are gonna work themselves out. And I mean, that very well could be true. I'm not like trying to dismantle anything. I'm just saying, like, it hurts to question our own beliefs, but it's necessary in growing. I feel like in your own knowledge, I feel like you handle things better when you embrace suffering instead of trying to cover it with some sort of defense mechanism. And I'm not saying like every person that gives these reasons as to why God does things as defense mechanisms. I'm not saying that that's what they're doing. I'm just saying a lot of times that is what they are. They're offering up reasons for something that they don't have an answer for. Like my dad passed away in 2016, and it was like over a 2-week time frame. Like before, a month before he died, there was no knowledge of anything being wrong. And, after that, he died. And obviously I questioned things like, why does this have to happen, like to my dad, of all people, like this, person who's, always treats people with respect, always tries to do the right thing. I mean, he was obviously human, but just I couldn't think of a better representative, not only for my dad, but just as a person in general. Why would he have to die? But like that type of stuff happens every day. Like I feel like we look at things sometimes through, our own lenses. And that's really all we can do anyway, but sometimes it's good to, I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's good to, I'm not going to say like embrace suffering, but like to look at it dead in the eye, not like avoid it by giving some lame excuse as to why it happened, because that's what people do. I don't know what I was trying to say with that, but I just, I think I've talked about it before, but I remember sitting, it was like the fourth floor at Barnes Jewish Hospital in St. Louis. I remember sitting up there, and I was seeing the cars that would drive by, and like I thought about how many times I had done that. And I wondered how many times someone else had been on the fourth floor and looking down and thinking and seeing no hope, or seeing, the depravity of certain parts of life and how things happen, and you have no answer for it. There is no answer for it. I'm sort of, talking, it may sound like I'm talking bad against Christianity or whatever, but I'm not. I just don't like people who offer false reasons for, why things happen, and just, and think that you're going to feel okay about that. People are scared, and rightly so. But, that doesn't mean it's not true. If hypothetically, if God does have a reason for, letting a family member die or you getting sick, would you want to know it? I've thought about that before. Like, would I want to know the reason and have it sort of all laid out on a table for me? And I always come back to say, in my head, no, I would not want that to happen, because then I would know, then it might change how I looked at things overall, right? One of my favorite quotes is it's by Oscar Wilde, where he says, there are two tragedies in life, and one is getting what one wants, and the other is one is not getting what one wants, and the other is getting it. So basically the idea is, like, you think you want something until you get it, and then you realize that you can't want it anymore. The whole thing is, and how that relates to this is like, if I knew the reasons as to why something happened, then maybe it would change my overall viewpoint of everything, if that makes sense at all. Like, I feel like knowing, if I had a choice between knowing everything about everything and then not knowing, I would always choose not knowing, because if you know the reason for everything, if you know everything about everything, then you can't do anything, right? Logically speaking. Like, if I knew how something felt when I don't know what I'm trying to say. If I knew if I knew the experience of what it was like to bite into one of my grandma's freshly made chocolate pies, then what would be the point of experiencing it? Because I already know what it's like. The whole point is like the rediscovery of it. Like, if you already know in advance how something's going to play out, or how something happens, then you basically already know what it's like to experience it, because you essentially already know everything about it, right? Like, that's one of the things I always wondered about an omnipotent being. Like, what does an omnipotent being lack? And that would be limitation, right? I mean, if you're omnipotent and you can do everything, then essentially you can also say about that person you can do nothing, right? Because you already know what it's like, or you already know what's going to happen once you do it. You have the foreknowledge to know, if I do, whatever it is, I'm gonna feel this way, and you can just make yourself feel that way, or whatever it is, whatever example you want to give. So yeah, I don't think. I always thought, like, if God had one wish, it would be to not know that He was God. Like, the whole point, and this is sort of like an Alan Watts idea, but the whole point of why life is exciting in general is because you don't know everything, because things are up in the air, so to speak. Like, for people who live in the sort of the quote unquote first world, things may be repetitive. Maybe you have a job and you go to it and you kind of just, have a 9 to 5 or whatever it may be. And then you have like a hobby on the side and you hang out with your friends on the weekend. It becomes very repetitive, but like, there's always that elusive quality about reality of not knowing what could happen tomorrow, even though life does become, fairly repetitive. That's sort of why people play the lottery, right? It's the dream behind it. It's the fantasizing about, what is to come. And if you already know everything about everything, you're omnipotent. You can't do that. You can't fantasize about anything because you already know it. There'd be no point in it. So, I'm very much on the same page with a guy who I may or may not have mentioned before. His name's Jacques Lacan. I take a lot of my ideas from him. One of the things he talked about is the reason we fantasize about things is to keep them at a distance from us. Maybe I can try to explain that. So you fantasize, you derive pleasure in fantasizing about attaining something, but the moment you attain it, it loses its value, whatever it may be. So the fantasy is where you gather the satisfaction from, setting the scene. Setting the scene is the pleasurable part. It's not ever the attainment of the objective. It's the setting the scene that you get enjoyment from, right? So, like, hypothetically, I want to become, a millionaire, and I'm always dreaming about becoming a millionaire, and I do everything I can, and the process of becoming a millionaire is what's enjoyable to me, because once I become a millionaire, I have to set a new goal, right? I think life essentially is just a game of perpetual goal setting. As melancholic as that may sound, as depressing as that may sound, I feel like what you do in life is you go from one event to the next, and you just set goals along the way, maybe consciously or unconsciously. So you go to school, you graduate high school, you get a job, you get a family, whatever it is, and these things are unconscious. They just play themselves out, right? I mean, there's no, sometimes there are goals, quote unquote goals that are unconscious. They're just things that you want to achieve, that you want to do, and that's just what you do. You move from one achievement to the next, or maybe lack of achievement. Some people, believe it or not, they don't want to achieve. It's called the death drive, or that's one reason why gamblers, they're not attracted to winning. They're attracted to losing sometimes. Like as crazy as that may sound, you may think that's stupid or whatever, but the enjoyment they get is the continuation of doing it. Because there's this lack that they want to feel that they can never fulfill. And that's another thing that I take from Lacan is they were always trying to get back to sort of an original feeling of wholeness or oneness that we think we once had. And that's why we set goals in the first place. That's why we always think, if I had this thing, then I would be happy. That thing is just always on the other side of the horizon. In our minds, I feel like most people, whether consciously or unconsciously, they're always seeking the thing that's gonna fulfill them, that's gonna make them happy. But in reality, that thing doesn't exist. It just, they seek for it in their spouse. They seek for it in, an object, maybe a car, or maybe a new house, or some commodity, or whatever. But that thing that they think will make them whole and complete doesn't exist. And I'll give you a sort of the theoretical example of where I got this from. So Freud, or Lacan's, stemming off Freud, basically said that, when you're born, you're essentially one with reality, okay? You're born into a world that's pure experience. So there is no subject-object distinction, meaning there is no you that's separate from reality itself. You are not separate from any object around you. You're just the same as it. It's just a realm of pure experience. Freud would call it the oceanic feeling. And at some point in a child's life, between 6 to 18 months, I believe it is, you get separated from that feeling, from that oceanic feeling. It's called the mirror stage, when you can see yourself in the mirror and you have this sort of promise of wholeness or completeness. Like, you see yourself in the mirror and you think, that's me. You recognize that you can be or are an independent agent in this world of reality, in this reality. And at some point, but you sort of feel, fragmented or whatever. You don't feel, complete. You see yourself in another, or you see another person. You sort of have this promise of completeness or whatever. And at some point, you enter into the symbolic, or what would be called, or what you could say, for lack of going too deep, you could say language. You enter into language, and you identify yourself in language. I am, Seth. I identify myself in language, but I also lose what I had before, that feeling of wholeness or completeness that I thought I had. If that makes any sense. I hope if you're listening, you maybe still get it, or you don't get it, whatever. So you're basically castrated or cut off from this oceanic feeling. And Lacan's idea is that you're always trying to get back to that feeling in life, but you're seeking it in partial objects or commodities or whatever it is. You're always seeking, and that's a very sort of rough generalization of Lacanian theory, but that's the sort of the beginning stages of becoming a, quote, subject, quote, human being in the world. So you're born, you're in this realm of pure experience, and then at some point you enter into language, which pre-exists before you ever come to be. So a lot of people think, well, I don't really want to get into that, but the idea is you enter into language. A lot of people think that we speak language when really it's just the reverse of that. Language is what speaks through us, because language pre-exists before we ever exist, right? I mean, when you're born, language is already present. It's always already been, and you haven't been, if that makes sense. So, in some sense, most people would say, yeah, I speak English, or I speak Chinese, or whatever. I speak the language, when really it's just bass backwards. It's language is what uses us to speak through it. I know that may sound complicated, or you may not agree with it, but just maybe think about it for a second. But I mean, it is paradoxical, because language couldn't exist without a subject, a thinking being, obviously. I mean, what would writing on the wall be without an interpreter? So, I mean, it's paradoxical, so. But yeah, so my idea is that most things in life are, generally speaking, paradoxical. And that's maybe like another topic for another podcast or another discussion. But I just kind of want to go back to kind of where I started at the first of this podcast, where I was talking about being mad at people who didn't sort of investigate their own belief systems, like, or where they came from or how they came to be. I think the main issue, when I'm thinking about it, or when I think about it, is I feel like when it comes to what you believe in, or when it comes to certain ideologies, you should try your best to know both sides of the argument. Like, if you are a person who believes in God, then you should know the, reasons for belief, and maybe, the reasons for unbelief. You should know both sides of the argument, I feel like. And I think where, I was struggling in my own life about what it is I believed, or what it is I thought I believed, maybe 4 years ago, I held that against people when I shouldn't have. Like, it's really none of my business whether, what it is people believe. It's not really something I should be concerned about. I guess I was just angry because, like, I feel like when you investigate, your own beliefs, you're gonna run into a wall to where you question why it is you believe certain things, and you're gonna run into uncomfortable you're going to have uncomfortable thoughts, right? I mean, if you're really diving deep into why it is you believe certain things, then there's always going to be antagonisms. Like, it's never going to be this sort of smooth A plus B equals C. You know, it's never going to be simplistic, or things are never going to completely make sense, and you just kind of have to accept that. Or I feel like that's something that people should just accept. So I guess I was just mainly angry or irritated when people didn't know the reverse side of the arguments of, you know, why there is a God, why there isn't a God, you know, whatever it may be, free will, whether we have free will or life's completely, you know, predetermined in advance, or, you know, whatever philosophical problem it is. I feel like you do yourself a disservice if you don't know both sides of the argument. But I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of philosophical topics that I probably want to cover in other episodes. You know, I don't want to just let it all hang out in this episode, but maybe I should finish with more of a lighthearted story to close it out. So I remember when I was in the ninth grade, and I was kind of, I hadn't really grown yet, so I was sort of just starting to hit puberty, and I think I made up for my insecurities a little bit in how I acted. Like, I was pretty outgoing, and I was always sort of the class clown, but more so like in the 7th, 8th, and 9th, you know, just because I sort of felt, I feel like looking back, you know, retroactively speaking, I sort of felt insecure because I hadn't really grown yet. I mean, I was like probably 5'2" or something in the 9th grade, and all my buddies had basically gone through puberty, and I was still really, really small. But the summer between the 9th and 10th grade, I grew like, you know, 5 or 6 inches. So by the time I went back to school, I was like 5'8" or 5'9". So it's cool by then. It's not like I did anything crazy, but anyways, when I was in the 9th grade, I remember I had an English teacher, and she was always, she didn't really get picked on, but she sort of let things ride a little too much. Like, she was very, she wasn't very stern. You know, like some teachers, you know, they just control their class with an iron fist. You know, it's kind of ridiculous. Like, you can't hardly even breathe too loud without them. You feel like they're, you know. I remember one time, you know, this is sort of a little bit of a digression, but I remember one time when I was in the same grade, I was in the 9th grade, and we had a science teacher, and like, she would just flip out on people just every so often. There was sort of a running theme, or not really a theme, but a running joke that she had always spiked her Sonic drink. Like, she would always have like this Sonic drink, and that before she came to class, she would have, I don't know, some sort of form of alcoholic beverage mixed in her drink. And one day in particular, we were sitting in class, and I think she had come to her wits' end. It's not like we were a bad class, but, you know, looking back, you know, just being a teacher and having to put up with kids all day is probably pretty annoying. And, but she said, all right, nobody's, you know, next person that talks is going to the office. It's pretty self-explanatory. Well, she proceeded to ask questions, which logically doesn't make sense. Do you want me to answer the question? What's going on? So she asked a question, and I raised my hand. And she said, Seth, go to the office. And I'm sitting there with my hand raised like a statue of a Greek god. Maybe not a Greek god, but just some sort of statue you would see like in Greece, where it's just like frozen. Like I'm like Medusa has just looked into my eyes. Like I was like, for what? She was like, you know what? I'm like, I really don't. I don't know. What are you doing? I don't know what you're talking about. And she's like, just go to the office. And I was like, okay. So I went out, and the dean of students at the time was pretty laid back, and my dad had already kind of put him in his place at one point in my tenure there at the high school, which I'll tell that story later. But he was just like, man, just chill out here till the bell rings. So I was like, all right. So I just sort of chilled out in the hall until the bell rang, and everybody else was asking me like, what happened? I was like, nothing. She was like, or they were like, well, why did she send you to the office? I was like, I don't know. Who knows? You were there. So anyways, back to the original story. The original story was, I have an English teacher. She's not very stern. And we're sitting in class one day, and you know how, like, sometimes the teacher will leave the room, and then they'll assign that one person who's supposed to look after the whole room. Yeah, right. That works really well. You know, they have that one person who's supposed to, write down if somebody talks or if somebody, farts too loud or something. But this one time, she left the room, and, remember, I'm 5'2", sort of the class clown, and I'm like, I see an opportunity, and I strike. And so I proceed to make my way under her desk. So I go on the other side of her desk, I get under her desk, and of course everybody is like already laughing. They're already like, oh my God, this is not taking place. And I'm like, yes, it is, And so she comes back in. This teacher comes back in. And, at first she, obviously doesn't notice anything. There's one student missing, whatever. And she, looks around, and everybody's sort of snickering. And she's like, where's Seth? Where's he at? Why is he not in here? Where did he go? And at this point, my fingers are sort of poking out the other side of the desk, like waving at all the students, like, well, yo, with a cup of cocoa, I'm like, and she, that's another thing that's embarrassing. She always wore like a dress, pretty much every day. She never wore, to this day, I don't ever remember her wearing pants. Like, nothing. No sweats, no jeans. Always like a skirt or a long dress down to the ankles. And so she is shorter anyway, so she pulls all the way up to the edge of the desk. I mean, she's like got her chesticles on the desk pretty much. And I'm like pinned against the back with my fingers, sort of flickering outside. And everybody's snickering, and she's like, what's going on? What's so funny? Like, what did he do? What did he do? And, I'm like staring into the abyss. Imagine this. She's wearing a dress, and I'm under there. Just try to get a mental picture of that. Like, I'm located under her desk. And so she, like, moves her feet or something and kicks me. I'm like, oh, God. And she's like, oh my God. You know, she's freaking out. Like, what are you doing under there? What? And she's like, go to the office right now. You go to the office right now. And so I went to the office. And I don't actually remember getting in trouble for that because I don't even know if I went in. Like, usually when they sent to the office, they were like, so-and-so's coming to the office, you know. But I think I just sort of, chilled outside or, I don't think I went to the principal at all. I was like, I ain't going. Like here I went under her desk. I've stared into the abyss. Like I can't, like I'm getting in some serious trouble. I just got to let this thing play out. If she's going to tell on me, she's going to tell on me. Or if she's going to get me in trouble, she's going to get me in trouble. But, so yeah, nothing really happened, but the moral of the story is I squeaked out of that one. I went on her desk. Everybody got a good laugh. Nobody got hurt. She might have got her pride damaged a little bit. She may still be in counseling for me doing that, but at the time I thought it was funny. I was always doing stuff like that, so I guess it was to be expected. But nobody got hurt. So I think that's going to wrap it up for this week on the Just Go With It podcast. If you've made it this far, I appreciate it. This has been a solo episode. If you liked it, I'm probably going to post it on all my social media forums. So if you could give it like a like, and if you haven't subscribed or to my podcast, you should say a prayer about it and think about it. And I do want to say that, before I close, I consider myself a follower of Jesus Christ. So, this is not I didn't want to make this a rant about, religious beliefs. I just get irritated when people offer up false reasons as to why things happen, And I know I sort of went all over the place with this podcast, about Lacanian theory and stuff like that. But where it started was basically me ranting about why people don't question their beliefs and why I think they should. I just think it's important, and I don't mean to I don't know. It is what it is, I'm just on here sharing my thoughts to the world. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, well, you shouldn't have listened to it to begin with, I guess. So, so we'll talk to you next week. Peace.